Fun story. My TV broke this week. I've got it replaced and stuff, but I'm really gonna have to pick something quick and easy to do a review on. Silent Assault. It's an unlicensed NES game made by some of the people who made the most unlicensed games from the time, Sachin, and it's not great. I mean, I've played a hell of a lot worse unlicensed games. Hell, I played a hell of a lot worse unlicensed games on this multi-cart I'm playing it on right now. But it's definitely not good. Now, the story is... So there's that. But if you actually want to know the full detail of the story, well, you've got this. And you've got this. I hope that clarifies some things for you. Honestly, I like my interpretation better. This game, at its core, feels like the people who made it saw Contra and said, you know what's great? Contra. And yes, Contra is great. It is one of the best games on the NES, I think. So they said, okay, let's make Contra. Oh, and you know what else is great? People with jetpacks. Let's add them. And spread shots. Let's add them. And aliens. And computers that yell at you. And this guy. Just this guy. And, you know, it feels like they created a whole laundry list of awesome things they could add to the game, and they absolutely did. And that's the full laundry list of good things about this game, because after this, they did absolutely nothing right. As you kind of expect with unlicensed games, but still, this one is just kind of weirdly not as bad as other unlicensed games, but there's no reason you should ever want to play it. I mean, just going to the controls, they are slow and clumsy. Jumping sometimes gets eaten up. Like, especially during the boss fights, for whatever reason, half the boss fights eat half your jump animation. Which you would think is not all that big a deal, but your hitbox is literally your character model. So, if it eats your jump animation, suddenly your character's teleported back to the ground, so's their hitbox. Which means half the time you're trying to jump and attack, you're gonna get hit by the attack because, you know, you didn't take into account, oh yeah, I don't have a full jump animation, I have like half of one. That's great. Your character controls so clumsily, and oftentimes you run into basically walls of enemies and shots that you kind of just sort of have to jump in between them and hope the controls are at least good enough to get you through that, which they usually aren't. The nice thing is, there are power-ups. The bad news is, they're kind of mostly crap. I mean, you've got weapons, which the only one I ever really found was a spread shot, which... that sounds useful, and when it's not being horrible, it is. The problem is, the game likes to hit a sprite limit, and as soon as it does, guess what the first sprites disappear? Well, if you guessed your bullets, you would be right. So you'll usually come up against a wall of enemies, and instead of shooting like 3 shots, well, suddenly you've got like 1, which is about as useful as your standard shot, and near as I can tell, these weapons are based around a time limit, and not based on use or death, so half the time the weapons aren't being useful when they're trying to be useful, and the other half the time, well, they're just not useful. There's hearts you can pick up, which will restore your health, which they don't drop half as often as they need to, because you get hurt a lot in this game, and on top of that, you can only carry like 3.5 for some baffling reason. And what's really great is these power-ups really make you understand how short the despawn mechanics are, because seriously, once you drop one, you have about 1.5 seconds to pick it up or it's gone. So half the time you'd be running ahead trying to catch a power-up only to have it disappear and then catch a bullet in the face. Or an enemy to rush you from behind. That's great. The one, like, objectively good power-up in this game is the cross. And that gives you like 5 seconds invincibility. And what's really interesting is, I can't prove it or anything, but while I was playing, I sort of noticed that there's something weird about the item mechanics in this game. When you pick up a cross and you're invincible and you start shooting enemies, you have a higher chance of just dropping crosses. In fact, it ended up leading to a moment where I ran into a room, got a cross, ran through the rest of the stage just picking up crosses because they kept dropping so often. That was actually kind of neat. The problem is everything else about the world design. I mean, you've got bits of environment that look like they won't kill you, and absolutely will. You'll find bits of environment that don't look like they're actually part of the environment and part of the background, and they're not. It's just awful at conveying stuff. I mean, in the second level, you've got these ladders that you can actually climb up, but it doesn't really tell you what the point of these ladders are, because there really isn't much. Until you go up, like, the first one on the high road, and then suddenly you're in the boss battle for no explicable reason. Which also led me to a rather interesting moment where I died on that boss, and teleport to somewhere else in, I think, like a completely different stage, only to come back and fight the boss again at a different point, I think. Yeah, this game is weird, and not even just including this guy. Because this guy. I mean, come on, right? But the point is, this game doesn't really do anything particularly competently. The controls are awkward, the weapons and power-ups are kind of garbage, the level designs are completely flat and awkward, and when they're not, they're completely trying to kill you with things that don't look like they'll hurt you but instantly murder you. You've got awkward enemy placement, which seemingly is random, but at the same time seems cranked way too high up to be remotely comfortable to play, and you just got general nonsense in this game. I mean, hell, after you go and infiltrate this giant military complex and fight around and, you destroy their giant main computer and you think you beat the game, suddenly for some reason you're running around a carnival shooting civilians. I think. This game is weird. Now the presentation to Silent Assault is, it's not bad. It's probably the high point of this game. You've got quite a large number of different enemy sprites, and the bosses are, well, they're kind of hit and miss, but for the ones that are good, they're pretty solid. I definitely like the giant computer that yells at you, because I think it's cute and goofy. And then, of course, this guy. Because there's no way I wasn't going to mention the giant head on a shoe on a cactus. Because this guy. Basically, visually, this game isn't bad. Once you get past the whole bits of environment aren't really conveying whether or not they're actual bits of environment or bits of something trying to murder you. If you can get past that, it's actually pretty passable. Although it's definitely nowhere near as good as other, like, AAA releases or anything. This is definitely an unlicensed game. Audio-wise, this game has literally one song, and it loops, and it's gonna drive you freaking crazy. Because this game's audio is garbage. Okay. Which leads to a presentation of average to below average. Still though, considering this is an unlicensed game, still kind of impressive. Especially considering some of the other unlicensed crap I've had to play in my time. Now, if you want to get a copy of Silent Assault on the NES in all of its awkward, janky glory, it's gonna cost you about $50. And speaking from experience as a person who bought it on a multi-cart for like $10, across the fact that it's got like 400 games on it, I spent nothing on it, and it feels like a game you should probably spend very little on. Because this game does basically nothing right. That said, if you want to see some of the better and unlicensed games for whatever reason, this one is definitely better, although that's not really saying all that much. I think the biggest issue, outside of just nothing functionally working about the game aside, the biggest issue this game has is there's really no reason to want to play this. Let's just, for a moment, assume that everything about this game plays perfectly fine. There's still really nothing special about this. It's just weird and out of place and nonsensical, with, like, no story. It's just, why would you want to? I genuinely have no idea, but if you want to play a better unlicensed game on the NES, this is certainly one to maybe consider, possibly.